Balogun. Please take it away, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I'm sharing my screen right now. Can you see?
Yep, we can see.
Thank you very much. So again, just a disclaimer, because I work in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm not here to to promote any specific product. So therefore, it is just general information which is in the public domain. And of course, it is part of our responsibility to educate people about what's going on, and of course, assist individuals to make an informed choice. I will start with a very interesting picture here. Again, personally, I don't think anyone should feel ashamed, particularly if they don't have any information about about vaccines or what vaccines really represent. Again, it's an historical issue, something which we know has always existed, and I'm afraid this is something which may also still continue to exist in the future. So the challenges around vaccines or vaccination is not going to go away overnight. But of course, what's unique in our current situation now is that people who didn't really show interest in the past have now decided to, to take it upon themselves to basically ask that question, okay, do I really need to be taking this vaccine? And hopefully at the end of the whole process globally, I think everyone would have become more informed, not just about vaccines, but about medicinal products which they take on a regular basis. Very quickly, again, one of the advantages of being the last speaker is I know most people would have said something about this. And of course, this is just a quick diagram to show you what typically major vaccine platforms that have been used in designing the vaccine. Now, the reason I'm showing this is to lay the foundation for the aspect of my presentation, which is, of course, looking at this from the angle of how vaccines are actually manufactured. Because it is one thing for us to say, yes, I'm happy to take the vaccine, but at the same time, there's always that question, where did the vaccine come from? How was it made? And I think that's a very valid question. And I think it's a question every single one of us should ask every time we are taking not just a vaccine, but also other medicinal products as well. Very quickly, again, I did mention that my focus is going to be how the vaccines are actually made. And I'm glad that Professor Balogun already said something along this line with regards to the testing and the fact that vigorous processes have been put in place to ensure that the vaccines are of the best quality. And of course, we can imagine, in a situation like this where there's eyes on everyone, those working in the manufacturing and in the approval of the vaccines as well. So there is close scrutiny from the public, and I believe that because of that close scrutiny, the vast majority of everyone involved will make sure that they dot their I's and they cross the T's correctly to make sure that they don't make a decision that they would later on regret down the line. And again, very quickly, what happens with vaccine development? Oftentimes you start with exploratory development, and the good thing is that for a very long time we've been aware of the corona. We've been aware of coronaviruses in general. And the good thing on this occasion is that the moment before the pandemic was even declared, scientists already had the genetic sequence or genomic sequence of this virus. That was as far back as early in the year last year, around about 12 months ago. They had the sequencing available to them, so they had something to work with. And of course, based on that, they were able to move very quickly to preclinical development. And again, at this point in time, we just need to let you know that the reason why everyone is talking about this particular virus in this occasion is because of the pandemic nature of it. Oftentimes, scientists are always working behind the scene. Even for conditions that we are not aware of, they are constantly doing something to see what is responsible for a particular condition and how they will be able to handle it in the future. And again, once you've done your preclinical science, you then move on to the clinical trials, which of course is divided into phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials. I will talk a bit more about phase 1, 2, and 3 trials in my next slide. But once that is done, once that is completed, then of course you then apply for approval with the regulatory agencies. And I think this is where things become, really, really critical, because all of the activities that the researchers or the companies have been involved in the last years, it becomes the moment of truth for them to actually say, look, all what we've done, is it worth it? Is it working? Because at the end of the day, the regulators might come back and say, look, we're not happy with what you're saying. And by the way, it has already happened already with some of the so-called vaccines that we have right now. So I think we're lucky in the sense that the vast majority of what we have currently produced have been seen in a positive perspective by the regulators or by the regulatory agencies around the world. And of course, once they've got the approval, then they go into manufacturing of the vaccines themselves. Now, I said something around phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. Again, this is where this is a stage where you initially test this, the vaccine or any product at all, in a very few people, very small population of people, to see, look, what's going to happen. Oftentimes you start with one person, you see how that one person behaves. You divide them into cohorts. You see how that one person behaves. You maybe treat maybe 5 more. And again, you continue to do that until you reach that 100 that you're looking for. At times, the number is less than that. But the information you get from that first one will now assist you in moving on to the next phase, which is phase 2 trial. Now, moving on to phase 2, because of what you are able to understand from your phase 1 trial, you are then able to move on to phase 2 trial and then use that information to redesign the trials. And then once you have additional data or information about the safety and the how the compound would work in the human body, then you now go into the phase 3 trials, which is always a large scale trial, oftentimes with thousands of people. Now, the advantage we have, unfortunately, in this current pandemic is that one of the best times to actually know if a vaccine would work or not is during a pandemic, unfortunately. And so it was an opportunity that we had an ongoing pandemic, and there were lots of people who were willing to volunteer for this trial to make sure that we were able to achieve sufficient data. In fact, I think there were more volunteers than the companies actually needed for many of these trials, because of the nature of the pandemic, and people were really, really ready to go along with volunteering for these trials. And again, the information has helped to move the trial very quickly. And again, very quick presentation here to show you what happens now. The question a lot of people are asking is, why is it so quick during this time, and why is this development very quick? We know in the past it takes an average of maybe 8, 9, or even 10 years to come up with a licensed medicinal product, not just the vaccine, a licensed medicinal product. It takes many years. And in fact, in some cases, it's taking up to 40 or 50 years to actually develop a vaccine. And ironically, for some conditions, viruses that we've had for a very long time, we've not even been able to develop a vaccine for it. But again, I think a combination of years of research and understanding of how some of these viruses behave has helped facilitate this current developmental process. Now, very interesting slide, which is shown here, which is developed by the WHO, showing us what actually happened this time around. Now, typically what tends to happen is that because of the amount of resources involved in developing a vaccine, oftentimes those involved tend to wait. They wait to finish preclinical. After finishing preclinical, they move to phase 1. They wait a few months. Now, preclinical at times take up to a year or 2 years. Then as you're doing that, you move on to phase 1, you move on to phase 2. Once you finish phase 1, you move on to phase 2. You finish phase 2, you move on to phase 3. Then you now start requesting for approval from the regulatory authorities like the FDA or the MHRA. Then after you receive the approval, then you now start manufacturing. Now, what's different this time around is that as scientists are coming up with data, as they're coming up with information, they are sharing that information in real time with the regulatory agencies. So they didn't have to wait till the end of a trial to go and start talking to the agencies to say, look, this is what we found. And you can understand the reason why the companies do it at times is obviously they want to protect, the patent rights. But this time around, the companies didn't really care. They said, look, you know what, we need to get an answer. And therefore, they were sharing that information freely with the regulatory agencies to tell them that, look, this is what we found. This is what we are saying. So by the time they had finished their phase 3 trials, the regulatory authorities already have a ton of information at their disposal that would help them be able to move forward, to be able to make a decision whether they want to approve the vaccine or not. So, and I think that's one thing that's very unique this time around. And again, scientific advice is something which companies don't oftentimes use with the regulatory agencies, but this time around, they were able to have very close collaboration with the regulatory authorities, with scientists around the world to say, look, all hands on deck. What ideas do you have? This is what we are seeing. Can you advise us what to do? And because of that close collaboration around the world, they were able to reach a quicker, end of the trial with sufficient data to now move forward. Again, manufacturing as well, they have started, preparing. You can see the millions of doses that have been produced around the world, created factories in advance, created, facility, trained people in advance in anticipation that, they will get a positive approval for their vaccine. Ironically, there are other companies who have spent that money and their vaccine have actually failed. So they've wasted that money. And you can see the reason why most of the time companies don't go down that route. But again, we find ourselves in a unique situation around the world, and governments and philanthropists were willing to put down money and willing to even allow that money to go down the drain, even if that science fails. But luckily, we are glad that for quite a number of them, these things have worked out very well. Now, and I think one very common question people tend to, show a lot of interest in is what's actually in the vaccine itself. Now, again, I'm not going to go into too much details about this, but what I can tell you is that we have, of course, the antigen, which of course is the main active ingredient. But of course, you can't just put the antigen in a bottle and begin to give people. You need to put it in a way that allows you to be able to inject it or to be able to deliver it correctly. First and foremost, you need to put it in a preservative. Secondly, you need to put it in a stabilizer, something that actually helps the vaccine to prevent it from sticking, the vaccine component from sticking to the vaccine vial. Because if you're not careful, you put it in a bottle, the vaccine itself would stick into the container, and you find it difficult to deliver it to people. Then you have surfactants. Surfactants are basically ingredients that help you bind all of your components together. Then there's something we call residuals. Now, these residuals are things you can't completely get rid of because of the manufacturing process of the vaccine itself. So these are things which you may say they are not really doing anything, but they are just part of that manufacturing process for the vaccines. Then finally, we have two more components. We have the diluents. Oftentimes, this is usually water, just ordinary water, water for injection or sterile water, which you kind of mix together with the vaccine to give it volume. And finally, you have the adjuvant, which helps to improve the immune response to the vaccine. Oftentimes, these are aluminum salts. And again, aluminum salts are things we are already familiar with, which we often find in our regular diets. Very quickly, clinical trial effectiveness, what does it mean? Now, and I think this slide is, specifically targeted for those of us who are still, thinking, having second thoughts about, does it really work? And what I can show you here in a pictorial form is that, simply put, again, for the Pfizer vaccine, assuming you have 40,000 people who were involved in the trial. Now, those 40,000 people were divided into two. Hypothetically, you have 20,000 people receiving the actual vaccine and another 20,000 receiving the placebo, which essentially is nothing. it has no vaccine. At the end of the day, only 8 of those who received the vaccine out of the thousands of people who had received the vaccines, only 8 of them eventually came down with COVID. And even those that came down with it, at the end of the day, they didn't experience a serious medical condition. And compared to 162. Now, from the perspective of an epidemiologist, the difference between 8 and 162 is massive by the time you factor in the millions of population of people around the world. So it is a breakthrough, and I'm glad of that the results which have been shared recently by the hospitals in Israel, because they were quite ahead in terms of the vaccination, and they've shown very promising results that, look, this actually works. It makes a difference in our hospital admissions, and it does make a difference in people who are actually falling sick as well. And again, I'm glad to see as well in the UK as well, we've seen significant improvement as well in the statistics. For those who are monitoring the daily results, we see that we've seen significant changes over time. Very quickly, I'm glad my colleague, Dr. Amma, already said something about this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But again, in the past, we know experiments have been done wrong. And of course, the question we need to be asking ourselves is that, should those historical challenges of experiments which have been done badly inform our decision about this vaccine today? The answer for me is no, because essentially I live here in the UK, and of course, when I'm standing on the queue to receive the vaccine, I'm receiving exactly the same vaccine that my other colleagues are receiving, whether white or brown or black, regardless of race. We're all receiving the same vaccines, and of course, we know that these historical challenges, were very well publicized, and it is a subject of training for every single healthcare professional to avoid these mistakes again. Again, very quickly, the summary of what happened with the Tuskegee syphilis study. I'm not going to go over this again, but this was something which was really, really bad, and it was really, really bad science. And hopefully, things like this will not repeat itself again. Again, the reason I'm showing this particular example is just to say that, look, this is not just for Blacks. Okay, it doesn't really. Historically, the issue has not been for Blacks. We know what happens in the Nazi medical experiments, which happened during World War II. Horrendous, terrible experiments that were conducted on people. There's so many of them, too many to even talk about. Even more severe than some of the things that we even talk about today now. So again, this is not just unique to Blacks. It is something which we know has happened to others as well. Again, finally, this is an example of one also that happened in New York. Again, this was Willowbrook School study. Very terrible experiment as well. This was done, to study the effect of hepatitis, and this was actually using mentally delayed, children who had mental challenges as well. And again, unfortunately, some of these disasters have been really bad. But of course, we know that this is not just unique to the Black population. This is science which have been done by, terrible people, and obviously, these are things that we now have, in this period, ethics committee, or who look out for some of these dangers in scientific research as well. So essentially, if you're going to conduct a research and the ethics committee doesn't approve of it, the ethics committee will be people locally in that area who understand the challenges being faced by the people. They would have to give approval for any scientific research to occur before anyone will be allowed to get involved in that scientific research moving forward in the future. Now, finally here, why did I take the vaccine? I'm saying this personally to myself, because quite frankly, I do share the concerns that many people have about these vaccines, in the sense that, we shouldn't, it's interesting, the survey that was conducted, that nobody trusted government. It's interesting that survey showed that no one actually trusted the government. And I'm not surprised, because because of some of the things we see on a day-to-day basis, and some of the people we call leaders, we will not be happy to even have them as neighbors, let alone appoint them as our leaders. So essentially, but again, it's an informed personal decision, in the sense that, look, what's actually going on here? What are the advantages? And for me, the first point here is, I need to protect myself, and I protect my family as well from many of the serious and potentially deadly diseases as well, not just for COVID, but other medical conditions as well, which we know vaccines can actually protect against. Also, it's an opportunity to protect other people in my community as well. And I'm glad that Dr. Aisha mentioned that in the example as well, that not everyone will be able to receive this vaccine or vaccines in general. But of course, by people who can receive it getting vaccinated, potentially they're also improving the overall immunity within the community itself. Again, I know that these vaccines have undergone rigorous safety testing before being introduced. And also they're also constantly being monitored as well. Again, I would say this, that some of these vaccines or some of these medicines are even safer than the food we buy in the supermarkets, where we don't even know where they're actually coming from. They've been done, manipulated many times, moved from place to place. So essentially, we know, generally speaking, from a scientific viewpoint, that testing has been done correctly. And again, we do recognize, I must say, that sometimes these vaccines do cause mild side effects, but of course, on balance, we know part of the reasons why it is causing it is because it is a sign that your immune system is actually responding to what has been injected. So that is a good thing in many instances. And of course, reduce or even get rid of some diseases as well if enough people are vaccinated. And finally, again, and I think Dr. Amma showed that example, that the relationship between vaccine availability and the eradication of certain medical conditions. Based on the estimate of the WHO, we know that roughly up to 3 million people, 3 million deaths worldwide is prevented every year as a result of vaccine programs. So this is all I have. In the interest of time, I hope with some of the things we've said here today, that we'll be able to would have converted some people. But again, at the end of the day, it's an informed choice. And I think it is very important for us to make that decision at a personal level and of course at a community level as well, to ensure that we are all protected against this deadly pandemic. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And I think and I look forward to to hearing people's feedback and also questions as well. So over to you, Mr. Michael.